Welcome, welcome. Settle in. This is going to be a good time. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to let people continue to trickle in. I want to welcome you all to the Mid-Career Conversations, Becoming a Social Innovator, featuring our guest storyteller, Michelle Dagnino. I'm very excited to be speaking with her today. My name is Zeynep Güler-Tak, and I will be hosting tonight's conversation. This is my fourth one, and I'm very excited. And it's just been such a joy to host these events with my alma mater. For those who benefit from visual cues, I'm a woman in my early 40s with Middle Eastern heritage, which gives me my olive skin and my darker features. As this event is virtual and we are not gathered in the same space, which I really wish we were, but hopefully soon. I recognize the following land acknowledgement may not be for the current territory that you are on. If this is the case, please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. The website native-land.ca, which we'll be putting in the chat box, is a great resource for this. And so what I'd like to do is, as a member of the York University community, I would like to recognize many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, I would be remiss not to mention the devastating attacks on Ukraine that have now been ongoing for about the past few weeks. Many of our community members, including alumni, students, are from and have ties to the Ukraine. Our thoughts are definitely with them during this time, their families, their loved ones. It's really been a tough time. So on to the Mid-Career Conversation series. This series is, like I said, I'm a big fan, as you could tell. It was created with alumni like yourselves and myself in mind, alumni that have really several years of experience in their fields, and really are now either deciding to or have already started to make a career transition or a career pivot. That's a common term we've heard a lot. So I can imagine a lot of you are going through that, as I've been going through it as well. Tonight's about coming together as York alumni to share our stories and experiences with one another, and guided by an alumni storyteller who will share theirs. This is not a how-to or a step-by-step guide. It's really someone's real-life account with a few tips sprinkled in. I would also like to acknowledge that today is one of my favorite days, International Women's Day, a day to celebrate the many contributions that women have made locally and globally to advance gender equity and also to make this world a better place. This year's theme is Break the Bias, hashtag Break the Bias. I'm sure you've seen it all over. It really acknowledges the struggles, barriers, and work yet to be done in creating a more resilient, sustainable, and equitable future that includes all of us. Whether deliberate or not, bias, it happens, and it makes it difficult for women to advance personally, professionally, and simply acknowledging that bias is not enough. Action has to be taken, and we must take that action. I'm proud to know that York is actively working to break the 6 common types of biases at work. This is a tremendous list: likability bias, attribution bias, performance bias, affinity bias, maternal bias, and intersectionality bias. Please research these, learn about them. You may even surprise yourself. They creep up on you. in your personal and professional spaces without sometimes you even realizing. And so additionally, York's 2020 to 2025 academic plan, Building a Better Future, calls on the entire community, that's all of us, to take meaningful action towards advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality being SDG number 5. One of the many reasons I've been proud to host mid-career conversations is because we've had such inspirational and incredible women storytellers. They've shared how they've navigated advancing their careers, overcoming varying obstacles, challenges to become leaders and innovators in their respective fields. It's been tremendous, which today you'll hear, one of those women who will tell us really and tell us their story about how they made an impact. So I'm very excited, but I'm gonna create a little bit of suspense for a little bit and tell you just a little bit about myself. I'm a fellow York alumni like yourselves, like some of you, and I received my BA in 2002, which feels like a way long time ago. I'm proud to be tonight's volunteering my time to be tonight's host. A bit about me: for the past 20 years, I have been a storyteller myself. I've really made that the focus of my career, and I've worked across the media, PR, tech, and travel sectors, engaging global audiences and producing multi-channel content with collaborators like Microsoft News, Time Out, Business Insider, NBC, and Lonely Planet. I've had the opportunity to create content that's actually made an impact, that's raised over $1 million in funds for COVID-19 relief, racial justice, and girls in STEM. Today, I have the privilege of working in the social innovation space with Elevate here in Toronto. And we are changing the face of tech and innovation by breaking down barriers for underrepresented communities. So this specific conversation today about social innovation and how to become a social innovator is very close to my heart. It's something I do in my everyday life and something I'm very passionate about. So I'm excited to dig in. To give you a little bit about what to expect from tonight's session. So here's kind of our run of the show and what we can look forward to. We'll be having a fireside chat style discussion, Michelle and I, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. As always, we expect all comments to be relevant and respectful. Feel free to use the chat. Okay, so now it's your turn. I've been chatty here. It's your turn to put in the chat box where you are tuning in from, your city, your province, your country. And I already see them coming in. I just want to make sure I can see everybody's answers. Oh, hey, Scarborough. Hey, hi, Scarborough. Vaughan, Brampton. All right, West Toronto, Ottawa. All right, we got a lot of GTA going on. We have some Ottawa. I love that. All right. Hello, everyone. All right. So after the Q&A, we're going to stop the recording and then move into our breakout rooms for the networking portion, which I love this portion. It's really fun. It's really great to engage with our community in this way for about 20 minutes. And then we'll return to the main room for final remarks and a little bit more networking for those who want to stick around. To get started, we do encourage you to keep your video on. I know circumstances, it's dinner time, it's bedtime for the kids and all that, but if you can have your video on, it makes it so much more of an engaging opportunity for a storyteller to see you and to engage with you and tell their story. But it is completely optional. As per Zoom meeting etiquette, we ask to keep your audio off during the remarks by clicking the mute button. And then finally, if you'd like to take a little tip from my screen name, you can add your first name, last name, pronouns, and degree and grad year so that we kind of create that little community feel and see where everyone's coming around from. And you never know, you might meet someone who's from your year or from your faculty or anything like that. So you can do that from the rename button in the Zoom menu. Now, I'm happy. I know that was a lot. I'm happy to welcome our storyteller for tonight's conversation, Michelle Dagnino. Okay, so BA02, MA03, LLB06. Michelle is quite the alumna. She is the executive director of the Jane Finch Community Center and a current member of the York University Alumni Board. We appreciate you, Michelle, for taking the time to join us to share your story today. And your perspective with us. So welcome, Michelle, and we'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in. It's been a long day, month, 2 years. So making the time to connect and to see everybody, I think, wanting to have an opportunity to speak with their peers and friends is heartwarming, particularly on International Women's Day, which I think for many of us holds a special spot for the women in our lives and the influence and impact that they have had in terms of, the people that we are today, the people we still hope to become. And thank you for the introduction and the invite. I wear a lot of hats, and one of the things that's interesting as you go on in your career, people really want you to have a title. And there's a bunch of titles that I hold, and a lot of spaces that I try to be a contributor in. So some of them, like the Jane Finch Center, are places that I have connections to professionally, but also personally as a Jane and Finch kid who parents immigrated from South America to the Jane and Finch neighborhood, which has always been very welcoming to newcomers, has always had a large Latino population, and is a community that has not only diversity of voices, but is a place where I think when you think about what the potential of the city is, I think it's contained in a neighborhood like Jane and Finch. But I have other hats too, including parent and volunteer, and active community member. I have worked for years in the space of public engagement and public consultation, particularly around the issues of bringing underrepresented voices to decision-making spaces. So I come here in the context of all of those hats because it's taken a while to accumulate to accumulate those when we talk about mid-career. And talk a little bit about the visual cues, because I as somebody who came into this space as a youth activist, I now say, in terms of who I am today, and just for people with visual difference, I'm a woman also in my early 40s and dark-haired, dark eyes, as I said earlier, Latina background, and cisgendered. And I've often occupied sort of spaces that were very relevant to my identity. So, as a young person, as a Latina, as a child of immigrants, as a working class kid, as somebody who's experienced poverty, those were a lot of the spaces that I first occupied from a social impact perspective and from a social innovation perspective. Now, at this stage in my career, I'm able to offer allyship to other communities and other spaces, that I'm here as a supporter and as an ally, not necessarily always with the same lived experience.
Thanks.
So that's kind of a roundabout intro.
Yeah, it's a fabulous intro. There's so much to dig into in there. What I'd love to know is, from the youth the work that you did as in your youth to where you are today. What did that career, tell us a little bit about that career path.
Yeah, so I started out as a youth worker, and at the time, quite frankly, it was a decently paid job. Time that I needed to pay for schooling and housing, and although I was privileged enough to have a scholarship through the Lura Foundation that some of you may be familiar with, I also needed to contribute to my household. And I think, like many of you who are children of immigrants, that children also need to provide supports, sometimes financial support to the household. So I worked in a space where I was welcomed. So I ended up in youth work because the perspective of a young person doing that work was welcomed. And it was at a time that social work in the city was really considering what it was to meaningfully engage the voices of the communities that they were serving. So a bit of a shift in terms of, social work, kind of the othering of social work, that others came to it from kind of a place of charity or from a place of, we have a privilege that we must share. So I came to it at a time that there was a real movement in Toronto around youth serving organizations being youth led. And the big, I think, shift for me and how I sort of how I went from youth worker to somebody who developed programs, who then went on to become consultant with the province and with the federal government, really around how to create good youth programs and through a strong youth engagement lens. And that was over the course of about 5 years that I went from being a youth worker to creating youth programs. Came from my own understanding of ensuring that we needed to actually embed those youth voices in governance structures. So, when I talk to others about what is important and what you need to consider about your career path, I say, so, where you are today is not necessarily where you're going to be a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But where you want to be, you need to think about what your access is to decision making and how you can provide a voice to whatever those decision-making spaces are. So it's not always going to be through paid employment, but for me, it was as a youth worker, but it was also a lot through volunteer spaces and through community spaces. And through, sitting on boards where you learn a lot about how an organization runs, and, volunteering for organizations that, were looking for kind of a representative voice of the community. So I did that work. I went to law school with a particular interest in poverty law and social justice law. And then I go to law school and I realized nobody knew what poverty or social justice law was outside of legal clinic work. And that law schools in particular are very oriented to pushing you to a corporate, into corporate law. And that's really where the various kind of career development processes exist, structures exist, is through the corporate law structure. But I met women and the women who became my mentors in law through volunteering at the YWCA. And they were on a similar to this. They were panelists on an International Women's Day panel. And and I was there as a panelist to help as a volunteer to help set up and get everything ready. And afterwards, I went on to up to the woman whose law firm I went to work at and said, "You're amazing. Can we go for coffee?" And she said yes, and eventually hired me. So like it's always about sort of thinking about the spaces that you want to occupy and be a part of, and thinking about how you get there. And then from law, I always knew that I sort of wanted to continue in social services. So after several years of private practice, I went back to social services, was doing national policy work, and then came back to the Jane Finch Center. One of the first jobs that I had as a youth worker was at an organization called Youth Action Network. And I left Youth Action Network when I was 24, and I hired an amazing young person to replace me who was 21. And about 8 years later, he hired me when he became the chair of the Jane Finch Community and Family Center. He hired me as executive director of the Jane Finch Community and Family Center. So it really went very much full circle. And I can give you lots of examples of how my career to this day has been connected to, some people who've been a part of my life for 20 some years.
Michelle, like, oh, circles here. Oh my goodness.
I need to draw a Venn diagram of it.
Oh my gosh, crazy. It just shows like you must have kept in touch, that networking portion, or just something in the air, like just that brought you back.
Yeah, I think part of my success professionally, but also how I live my life, is to assume that everybody has something that they want to offer to the world.
Right.
And part of the strength of the relationships that I have in my life is that people see that I have valued them for who they are, and what they want to bring, even if we don't necessarily always start out with all the right skills or all the technical expertise. But if you are coming with a passion and an interest, then like I'm right there next to you. And to be honest, it is what people offered to me, because I didn't have the skill set to match my passion and enthusiasm for at least the first 10 years of my career. But I had a lot of, I was granted a lot of generosity, particularly from the women that I worked with, and from the female mentors in my life who were, very, very generous in their, in allowing that enthusiasm to carry me.
They made
and
space
until
for
the
you,
skills
right?
caught up.
Yeah,
until
they
the
made
skills
space
caught up
for you, and then the skills caught up, and that was just
Yeah.
like magic ingredients. Okay, so we are going to move into the Q&A. But because I have this, you've already touched upon so many of the questions I had for you. So I'm so appreciative, and this has been so inspiring already. I want to give our attendees an opportunity to ask you some questions. And I may sprinkle in a couple of my own while we're going through the Q&A, because I know this is a topic that I have a bunch of questions after you told us your story. But I also want to share the space with some of our attendees. So this is our Q&A portion. I would really love, let's open up the chat. You can raise your hand or you can throw your questions in the chat via the Zoom button, and I'll call on you to ask your question. As always, we expect all comments to be relevant and respectful, but this is kind of your opportunity to ask Michelle any of the questions that you may have about this career development, moving into the social innovation space, and really developing your career, because it sounds like Michelle has done a few things that we would be interested in terms of relationship building, in terms of how to ramp up those skills in a space that you're not as familiar with. These are all kind of those transferable things that we all need to learn about. It doesn't matter what industry we're in, right? So there's a couple things that I heard as I was listening. So don't be shy. There's lots of opportunities. And honestly, if I can't see your hand, I'm so sorry.
Julia, I think, has a hand up.
Yes.
Oh, there
Hello.
we go.
Hi.
Julia.
Hi, both of you. This is really, really great. Thank you so much for your time, Zainab. That's really helpful. And Michelle, I love the passion and your energy when you talk about making a change and everything that you're doing. It's so inspirational. And I'm kind of in a similar position because I think I've excelled quite a bit in the business world, and I've always wanted to do something and in the social innovation space. And you were talking about developing skills, etc. What advice would you recommend to somebody that's looking to explore, that maybe develop some skills that can help a lot in the social innovation sector, but doesn't really know where to start looking for, how to make an impact, if you have any advice?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question. So I will say, I would not have gotten the job that I ended up getting in the social services sector if I didn't have a law degree. And in part, it was because the law degree was an indicator to my employers that I had certain administrative skills that were important to the work. And there is this at a leadership, the leadership role within social services or kind of the social impact sector, there is significant administrative duties associated with it, which I think sometimes we forget. I think we think it's just we're always just coming up with all these amazing ideas. So I will say there is, if you are able to demonstrate skill sets around implementation, I don't think the challenge is lack of ideas in this world. The challenge is around people sort of putting up their hands and saying, okay, I'm going to make it happen. And sometimes, making it happen includes, putting together spreadsheets and putting the budget in Excel and, sending 10,000 emails of which you're going to get, 2 people responding to you. It's not just sort of the glamour of kind of sitting around and somebody comes up with the idea that's going to change the world. The ideas that are going to change the world, many of them are already out there. What we're not able to do is implement. So I think from a CV perspective, from looking at jobs, because without question, there's a lot of jobs, right now in the social impact sector. Charity Village is a good place to go for job postings for that. So is Indeed. LinkedIn is probably the one that you're going to find sort of most jobs that you can specifically look at. But you're really going to want to be able to speak to your experience and your vision around implementation. So how do you take ideas and how do you practically implement them? And you want to be able to provide real life examples. It doesn't have to be earth shattering, right? It's not about, that you found, the solution to some earth shattering problem. It's also around, okay, so, I was in this space where there was constant conflict. Here is how I moved us away from a conflict and to a place of collaboration.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Yulia. That was a great question. And that feels like that strategy. I can smell the strategy coming out of that, right? That implementation part. Emily, you had your hand up. Did you want to ask us your question?
I actually just wanted to, if I could, speak to Yulia's question, because our speaker really mentioned something valuable about sitting on boards and how it's such an incredible opportunity to develop competencies. And at the same time, you build your CV and you're growing those skills in a leadership capacity. And so if you've got, I believe, does Yulia have a law degree as well?
I don't have a law degree, but I'm graduating MBA from Cambridge right now, Cambridge University. And I have, like, I actually tried to get onto boards, but because I don't have experience on boards, it's actually hard, even though I have like a credible degree, a master's and business experience. I don't know how to get into boards actually either. Yeah. But
that might be our next career conversations, maybe.
Well, yeah, and I will say, like, keep reaching out. So, I'm happy to have you email me after, because I often hear from partner agencies who are looking for board members, and not everybody advertises either. So it's also helpful to take a bit of a mapping of the types of organizations that you're interested in, and send an email that says, I'm interested in volunteer work. I'm interested in, supporting your organization, including through board membership. Can you please let me know, next time you're advertising for board members? Because I find like a tenth of the organizations advertise in any kind of public way, if even a tenth.
Wow. Thank you so much for the offer. Would you be able to kindly share your email in the chat?
Yeah, I will. And the offer is open to anyone. Please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you for that. I would like to ask, let's see if there is anybody, but I have a question about, Michelle, can you tell us one thing you wish someone told you during your career journey?
As a woman, don't put up with all the bullshit. I put up with a lot of, and I think a little bit too, it was how, a little bit of how I was, raised, but I put up with harassment and a lot of sort of diminishing of who I was, and a lot of sense that I should just be, grateful to be there. And, I look back now, I really, I was put in a lot of uncomfortable situations, which one, I shouldn't have been put in. And two, I didn't necessarily know better. So, I can only go back and fault Michelle of that time so much. But it's what I would say to you now, is to trust your instincts. And it doesn't mean that we don't ask for advice, and it doesn't mean that sometimes we don't need sort of to check kind of those instincts and, to check in with others, but, don't also allow yourself to be put in a place where you don't feel safe, or you don't feel like you are being valued for what you actually bring to the table.
Tremendous, Michelle, especially as women, we tend to push down our instincts the most.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that, in the work that we do in social innovation and social impact, that's where we should be leaning into our instincts the most, right? And I think that's where, I think that's so important for everyone to kind of keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to kind of slowly, honestly, if you have any questions, obviously Michelle is open to fielding those during our networking, as well as afterwards. So please feel free. And so in a few moments, you'll be prompted to join a breakout room with about 3 or 5 other alumni and attendees. We invite you to stay, take this opportunity to network with others. It's great fun. You just don't know what is like that you'll come up with, and some of the ideas and some of the experiences and stories that you'll share. It's just actually an incredible experience. Our icebreaker question will be broadcast to your room, and should you choose to use them, they're actually quite fun. And then you'll have 20 minutes to connect, tell your stories, and then we'll be invited back. We'll have I'll do some final remarks, and then we can kind of continue for those who want to stick around for the networking proportion after that. So I just wanted you to, yeah, I think you're all starting to get put into your breakout rooms. Am I on the right track? Yes. Okay. I just want to make sure we're on the right timing.